many of you out there are secret admirers of those air crash investigation shows on the television. I love these shows not because I'm an ambulance chaser, but because I have a deep fascination with how our system of governance works to deliver various outcomes for society. So these shows, they really give us a bit of a sense, if you like, of what governance is all about. Governance, when I'm talking about it, is not about government. It's about the way we make decisions from the very top to the very grassroots of our society. And these shows just give us a little example of how the system of governance for air travel works to get us safely from point A to point B. So you're probably thinking at this stage, he's going to talk about governance. That's going to be pretty boring. I'd much prefer he was an ambulance chaser. But I want to tease out three very important things that these shows, I think, can teach us about governance. Now, the first is, it's not usually just that loose bolt that causes the crash. It's really the human decision that leads to the bolt not being tightened in the first place. And it shows us that the smallest of decisions in our system can actually lead to very tragic consequences. The second thing these things show us is that it's not just the decision about the nut that's important, it's actually a number of decisions at different levels that really play out, that culminate in a series of very unfortunate events that actually lead to a crash. So it shows, I suppose, that all of us at different places in the system have a role to play, whether it's from the mechanic to the pilot, whether it's from the passenger to the air traffic control tower. But the last thing these shows give us is the fact that somebody usually comes along in a high visibility suit from the Air Traffic Investigation Bureau, and their job is to be the system's doctor. They're the people that pull together painstaking levels of evidence. They engage everybody involved. They come up with recommendations for the future. But they're not usually about blame. They're really about trying to say, we all play a role. What should we all do differently to make the system work better and to avoid a crash in the future? So somebody said to me the other day, the reason the air travel system works so well is because everybody is unflinchingly wedded to one core objective, and that is air safety. Nobody wants to see a crash. And this triggered a little light for me the other day because when I look at governance systems, that issue of unity of purpose in the system is really, really very important. And I'm going to come back to that. So I can see why many of us potentially just want to stay in our little box, isolated from the rest of the system. We think it's politicians and it's people in high office that make decisions. But in reality, it's the decisions we all make every day of the week that actually lead to the health of society. So to illustrate this point, I'm going to take us to the nirvana of a governance system of one. So this is me on a far north Queensland beach. To get in there, I've had to cross a creek with crocs in it at the right tide time. To get out, I've got to go across a number of cliffs in the height of the box jellyfish season. But when I'm in there, I feel a little bit like Robinson Crusoe. I can do what I want on this great desert island when I want. Nobody's going to get in the way. But after a little while, I realised I've got nobody to share the experience with. I mean, I've got no mobile phone reception. I can't Facebook what I'm doing. And actually, to get in and out successfully, I've got to actually move to a governance system of two. So, entree my young son, Taylor. Much as I love him, it reminds you that the nirvana of a governance system of one really is a falsehood. Suddenly I've got somebody with a different idea about where we should stay, how long we stay there, what time we get up in the morning. I mean, he is a teenager. I have different ideas about which route we take across the cliffs, what time we tackle the tides. So things get a little bit more complex. But we tend to engage each other. We usually get to an agreed objective about what we want to do. We look at the evidence of tides and times. We get in and out safely. We have a great time. And better still, he actually comes back with me on other adventures in the future. So I think this just reminds us that the moment we're talking more than one person, we are in the realms of politics. So I'm going to just test something here. I'm just going to get everybody to check your pulse. Firstly, I want you all just to double check your pulse. I want to make sure everybody has one. Everybody does have one, hopefully. There's somebody up here. Jenny, we might need to get a medic up here just in case. If you have a pulse, you are a politician. And I'm going to come back to that point as we go on. So this is what I do for my job. I tend to look at complex governance systems, and I look deeply at what it is that makes them succeed or what makes them come to a crashing halt. One of the areas I work in quite a lot is in Indigenous development. It's a big policy area for government, around about $4 billion per year, and government is really struggling to achieve its policy objectives. Higher life expectancies for Indigenous people, lower incarceration rates, greater employment outcomes, and so forth. And it's struggling in the sense that if it fails, there are really significant implications for Indigenous people themselves, but also for our international standing. They have to get this right. There is trouble, though, in the governance system from the policy level to the program level, right down to the project level. And I tend to jump straight to the project level when I'm looking at these things, because if there is a clear difference between what the client wants to achieve in a project and what government wants to achieve, the chances of success are exceedingly low. So one of the areas I work in Northern Australia quite frequently, and one of the groups I work with are the Wik people, whose territory covers an incredibly biodiverse and culturally diverse piece of coastline. In that 150 kilometres of North Australian coastline, there's something like 26 different clan groups, some 13 different language groups. Nearly all of those clans are on about one thing. They want to see increased control and access to their traditional lands. They want to get their kids away from the one big regional town and the social problems that that entails to give them a culturally appropriate living area. They want to have livelihoods that make sense to them from a cultural point of view. But government projects are nearly always about something culturally entirely different. Sophisticated commercial enterprises, skills for the job market, employment in the mainstream economy. So when the Wik and the government talk together, they use quite frequently the same language around projects: cattle, horses, fences, saddles, but quite often what the cultural meaning behind those words and the objectives they're seeking to achieve are fundamentally different. So anthropologist David Martin calls this a form of parallel talk, if you like. People are having the same words but meaning entirely different things. Unless governments are able to fundamentally broker real agreement with people at this level about what everyone genuinely wants to achieve, to build real relationships, to build on small wins, the chances of success are very low, and that flows into problems at the program and the policy level and upwards. So these things are very, very critical. Now, if this governance thing is so important, I'm going to scale us up a little bit from the project level to the planetary scale. And I'm going to remind us all that societal collapse actually is pretty much the norm for our species. It's not a new thing. I'm not quite sure why as a generation we think we're going to get away from it. Now, I'm probably being a little bit pessimistic there, but I'll tell you where I am optimistic. I think we do know a lot more than we used to do in past generations and before us, and we know a lot more about what it takes for good governance to deliver better outcomes for society. But I'm going to check and double check your role, the politician with the pulse, in contributing to the governance of those big challenges that we face. In short, how are you going to contribute to saving civilization as we actually know it? So let's just look at a couple of examples. We know in the global financial crisis, a crisis that led to significant hardship right across the globe, it was the role of the individual borrowers that contributed to the downfall, in addition to the role of the banks and government regulators. We know in relation to climate change, all of our individual carbon contributions, carbon emissions, add up to the total, not just the emissions of the big polluters. We know that in relation to pandemics and new diseases, it's our individual sanitary decisions and actions that are critical to disease control, not just the roles of the hospitals and the disease control centres. And we know if we're going to prevent the alienation of different cultural groups and our youth, everybody needs to be well engaged in this wonderful but flawed thing that we have that we call democracy. So the take-home message for everyone here is, I can understand why most of us tend to want to stay pretty much in our box, to be isolated from the broader governance system, and effectively to let the system work itself out. It's easy, it's safe, it's not complicated, it's not overwhelming for us. So I do understand that. But I'm going to tell you, I'm a systems and a silos type of guy. Now, a silo in the Australian vernacular is one of those structures that we use to protect the grain, if you like, from the weather and from the climate, to keep it safe. These silos are very important because they play a very special role on behalf of society. And in fact, we need many, many different types of silos for the world to work effectively, for our society to function. But every silo also needs the systems that connect it to the farm and connect it to the market. Now, the good news for everybody here is that most people are either systems and or silos types of people. And the roles, those two different roles, have got incredibly important things to contribute to the future of our society and the health of our governance system. So firstly, if you're a systems type of person, these people are a little bit like the air crash investigation team that we talked about before. They're the people that bring together the evidence, that engage everybody, that think through and help design the solutions for a better society into the future. So they play a very, very critical role. There's not many of them, and you probably know if you are one out there. I'm going to encourage you to take up the cudgel of making your career and your life really contribute to this business of keeping the glue of society together. It's a very, very critical role. To get out there, to do that in our families, in our businesses, in our communities, in our nation, and even globally. It's a critical role to play. But if you are more comfortable in your silo, and I want to stress, it is important that we have most of us in our silos, and being in a silo is not necessarily a bad thing. But at least I'm encouraging you to recognise that we are part of a system. To lift a little bit the lid of the silo, have a little bit of a look out there, really recognise, I suppose, and have some empathy for those other silos that are out there. Have some respect and some thought for the systems people who are trying to keep it all together. Recognise, effectively, that you are in the political realm. The one thing I don't want you to do is die alone like Robinson Crusoe on some sort of desert island. I want you to every now and again just double check your pulse. Make sure that if you have one, remember you are a politician. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Engage with the world as though you are one. Thank you.